Big news! Your soulmate is happier than ever. Because you finally did this. My beloved child. Something changed inside your soulmate, and the strange part is that you may not even realize you caused it. They are happier than they have been in a very long time. Not because someone gave them good news. Not because their problems suddenly disappeared. It happened because of something you finally did, something they had quietly hoped for but were beginning to believe would never happen. At first, they tried to hide how deeply it affected them. They went through their day normally, but there was a lightness in them that other people could actually notice. Someone close to them even asked why they seemed different. Your soulmate smiled, avoided the question, and changed the subject. But inside, one thought kept returning, you. So what exactly did you do that created this sudden emotional shift? Don't skip, because the answer begins with a small moment that looked almost meaningless from the outside. For a long time, your soulmate had been watching for one particular sign from you. They weren't necessarily waiting for a dramatic confession or some perfect romantic gesture. What they needed was proof that something had changed in the way you carried yourself. And recently, they saw it. Maybe it was the way you stopped chasing an answer. Maybe you finally chose your peace instead of reacting to uncertainty. Maybe you quietly established a boundary they never thought you would have the courage to establish. Whatever form it took, your soulmate noticed that you were no longer standing emotionally in the same place. And instead of frightening them, it awakened something unexpected. They realized you weren't trying to force the connection anymore. You were becoming stronger without becoming cold. That distinction mattered more than you know, because your soulmate had secretly feared that everything between you had been damaged beyond repair. But when they recognized this change, another possibility suddenly entered their mind, and that possibility is why their happiness is turning into something much bigger. Here is where things become interesting. Your soulmate's happiness isn't only about what you did. It's about what your action has now given them permission to do. There has been a decision sitting quietly inside them, something they kept postponing because they couldn't predict how you would respond. They questioned whether you still cared. They wondered whether too much time had passed. And more than once, they almost convinced themselves to leave everything unspoken. But your recent change answered a question they had never been brave enough to ask you directly. Now they're looking at the situation differently. Something huge is waiting for you, because their next move may not be subtle at all. They have begun thinking about closing the distance, saying what they previously swallowed, and finally showing you why your decision affected them so deeply. But before they make that move, there is one truth they need to face, and when you discover what they've been hiding behind that happiness, everything about their reaction to you will suddenly make sense. What your soulmate is finally admitting to themselves changes the meaning of everything that came before. They weren't only afraid of losing you. They were afraid that when they finally became ready, you would have already stopped believing in them. That fear followed them quietly through moments when they wanted to reach out but didn't. They imagined conversations with you, rehearsed words they never sent, and wondered whether one more delay would permanently close the door. Then you did something they weren't prepared for. You stopped letting uncertainty control you. You didn't become bitter. You didn't collapse emotionally. You simply began choosing yourself with a calmness they could feel even from a distance. And strangely, that is exactly what made their heart feel hopeful again. Because suddenly they weren't looking at someone waiting to be rescued by love. They were looking at someone they could finally meet with honesty. But there was another reason your change affected them so strongly. Your soulmate had secretly been carrying guilt. There were moments they knew they could have handled differently. Words they should have spoken sooner. Silence they allowed to stretch too long. And while you may have wondered whether they noticed what that uncertainty was doing to you, they noticed far more than they ever admitted. That's why seeing you reclaim your confidence created two emotions at once. Happiness and urgency. Happiness because they could sense you becoming yourself again. Urgency because they realized your life wasn't going to remain frozen while they figured themselves out. Stay till the end, because this is where their thinking shifted dramatically. Instead of asking, "Will they still be there when I'm ready?" your soulmate started asking a much more uncomfortable question: what am I actually willing to do before I lose my chance? And for the first time, their answer wasn't to wait. That decision has already begun changing their behavior in small but meaningful ways. They're thinking more carefully about what they would say if they had one completely honest conversation with you. They're remembering specific moments between you that they once dismissed as insignificant. Most importantly, they're no longer imagining a future where everything simply fixes itself without action. They know someone has to move, and your decision to stop chasing clarity has quietly placed that responsibility back into their hands. That's why they're happier than ever, not because they believe they can take you for granted, but because your strength finally forced them to understand what this connection truly means to them. And now there is something they are preparing to reveal, something connected to the exact moment they realized their feelings had become impossible to ignore. But there is one detail about that moment you still don't know. Someone else noticed the change in your soulmate before they were willing to admit it themselves. The person who noticed your soulmate's change didn't need an explanation, the difference was written all over them. Your soulmate had become lighter, more present, almost as though a pressure they had carried for months was finally beginning to lift. At first, they denied anything had happened. But then one simple question caught them completely off guard: does this have something to do with that person you never really stopped caring about? Your soulmate went quiet. And that silence revealed more than an answer ever could. Because in that instant, they realized something important. No matter how carefully they had hidden their feelings, the people closest to them had already seen the truth. They had noticed how your name changed their expression. They had noticed the way certain memories still affected them. And now they were noticing something else, a happiness your soulmate could no longer disguise. But what your soulmate admitted next surprised even the person sitting across from them. They finally said that you had done the one thing they secretly needed you to do: you stopped trying to prove your value to them. You stopped carrying the entire emotional weight of the connection. You stopped making their uncertainty your responsibility. And instead of pushing your soulmate farther away, that change made them see you more clearly than ever. Suddenly, they remembered the patience you once showed them, the moments when you understood what they couldn't explain, and the chances they had been given without fully appreciating them. Then came the realization that shook them: your happiness was no longer dependent on what they decided. You were moving forward emotionally, and they could either become brave enough to meet you there or remain behind. That should have terrified them. Instead, something unexpected happened. They smiled, because for the first time they knew exactly what they wanted to do. But that smile came with a decision they haven't told you about yet. Your soulmate doesn't want to return with vague words, mixed signals, or another conversation that leaves you questioning everything afterward. They know that wouldn't be enough anymore. Something has shifted inside them, and now they're considering an action that would make their intentions impossible to misunderstand. Don't skip what comes next, because they have already imagined how this moment could happen. They have thought about what they need to say first, what truth they can no longer hide, and what they will do if you don't immediately give them the response they're hoping for. Your soulmate may be happier than ever, but underneath that happiness is nervous anticipation, because the thing you finally did has given them courage, and that courage is pushing them toward a move they once believed they would never be brave enough to make. That move is becoming harder for your soulmate to postpone, because every day they wait now feels completely different. Before, waiting felt safe. It protected them from rejection, uncomfortable questions, and the possibility of hearing something they weren't ready to hear. But after seeing the change in you, silence no longer feels safe, it feels risky. Your soulmate understands that you finally stopped arranging your emotions around their hesitation, and that realization has created a strange mixture of excitement and fear. They are genuinely happy that you found your strength, yet they also know what that strength means. You can continue without them. And this is the detail they never expected to confront. They always assumed there would be more time. More chances. Another perfect moment somewhere ahead. Now they're realizing the perfect moment may never arrive unless they create it themselves. And recently, they came frighteningly close to doing exactly that. There was a moment when your soulmate almost reached out. They had the words in their mind, and for once, they weren't planning to hide behind a casual conversation. They wanted to tell you that your change had affected them. They wanted to admit that watching you choose peace forced them to examine their own behavior. Most importantly, they wanted you to know that their happiness wasn't coming from seeing you pull away, it was coming from seeing you become the version of yourself they always knew was there. But just before they acted, they hesitated. Not because their feelings disappeared. Something deeper stopped them. They suddenly wondered whether approaching you now would look selfish. Would you believe they only became serious because they sensed you moving forward? Would you question why it took your silence for them to finally find their voice? Those questions made them pause, but what happened afterward made their decision even stronger. Instead of abandoning the idea, your soulmate began thinking about how to approach you differently. Words alone might not be enough anymore. They know consistency will matter. They know you may watch what they do more closely than what they promise. And surprisingly, they're prepared for that. Something huge is waiting for you, because this happiness has turned into determination. Your soulmate is no longer asking how to convince you in one emotional moment. They're asking how to show you, over time, that their intentions are real. That is a major change from the person who once believed silence could protect everything. Yet one final obstacle remains. Before they can come toward you honestly, they need to confront the real reason they held back for so long, and it isn't the reason you probably imagined. There was one fear beneath all the others, one they barely admitted even to themselves, and your decision to finally choose yourself has forced that hidden fear directly into the light. The fear they finally uncovered wasn't simply rejection, it was the possibility of being truly seen by you. Your soulmate knew that coming closer would mean they could no longer hide behind timing, confusion, or carefully controlled emotions. You had already seen pieces of them that most people never noticed. The hesitation beneath their confidence, the tenderness beneath their distance, and the feelings they tried to disguise when things became too real. That frightened them because loving you honestly would require vulnerability, and vulnerability meant giving you the power to matter in ways they couldn't control. For a long time, they believed keeping some distance would protect them. But then you changed. You stopped demanding answers from uncertainty and began protecting your own peace. Suddenly, your soulmate saw what their fear had actually cost them. They hadn't protected themselves from pain. They had nearly protected themselves from the person they genuinely wanted, and that realization hit harder than they expected. Something else happened after that realization. Your soulmate started revisiting memories differently. A conversation they once considered ordinary suddenly carried new meaning. A moment when you pulled back instead of arguing now looked like quiet disappointment. Even something kind you once did without asking for recognition returned to their mind with surprising force. They began connecting these moments and understanding something they had missed while living through them. You had already shown them what sincerity looked like. The problem was never that they needed more proof from you. They needed courage from themselves. And now that you have finally stopped proving, chasing, and carrying what should have been shared, your soulmate feels an unexpected freedom. They know the next step belongs to them. But here's what makes this different from their previous attempts: they don't want to approach you just because they're afraid of losing you. They want to approach because they have finally decided what they're willing to offer. And that decision is becoming specific. Your soulmate has been thinking about one honest conversation where nothing important gets hidden. No pretending the past didn't happen. No vague promises about someday. They want to acknowledge where they failed you, explain what was happening inside them, and then tell you what they actually want now. Yet there is one thing they are refusing to predict: your answer. They understand that choosing yourself also means you have every right to question them, take your time, or even make them prove their intentions through consistent action. Strangely, accepting that has made them even happier, because for once they aren't trying to control the outcome. They're preparing to show up honestly and let you decide what happens next. But before that conversation takes place, your soulmate has one more choice to make. And what they're considering doing before they speak to you could reveal just how serious this change has become. Your soulmate is now considering something they once would have avoided completely, making their intentions visible before asking you for anything in return. They know an emotional speech could sound beautiful, but beautiful words aren't what changed you. You changed because you finally understood that your peace couldn't depend on promises without action. Your soulmate sees that now. So instead of planning how to persuade you, they're quietly asking themselves what they can change in their own behavior first. What can they finally take responsibility for? What pattern must end before they stand in front of you asking for another chance? This is where their happiness becomes important, because it isn't the temporary excitement of believing they have won you back. They know they haven't. Their happiness comes from finally feeling certain about what they want, and after so much hesitation, that certainty feels almost unfamiliar. But one particular decision is beginning to separate this moment from everything that happened before. They have decided they don't want you doing the emotional work anymore. Think about what that means. No more expecting you to interpret silence. No more leaving you to wonder what a small gesture meant. No more hoping you'll somehow understand feelings they refuse to communicate. Your soulmate realizes that if they come forward, clarity has to come with them. And this realization has created a question they keep repeating privately: if I truly care, why should they have to guess? That question has exposed every excuse they once used to delay. Don't skip, because this is also where they recognize the full impact of what you finally did. By stepping back from uncertainty, you didn't destroy the connection, you revealed whether it could survive without you carrying it alone. Your soulmate saw that clearly, and instead of letting it disappear, they are preparing to carry their side of it. Yet there is still one detail making them nervous. They don't know which version of you they'll meet when they finally step forward. Will you still feel that familiar warmth? Will you protect your heart more carefully now? Will you listen quietly and make them prove everything afterward? Your soulmate has imagined all three possibilities, and something surprising has happened. None of them is making them run anymore. They are beginning to understand that your response doesn't need to be immediate for their effort to be sincere. If they have truly changed, they will have to respect your pace just as much as their own feelings. That realization has made their next move far more thoughtful than you might expect. Something huge is waiting for you, because they're no longer preparing only what to say, they're thinking about the first concrete action that could show you they mean it. And there is a reason they have chosen that particular action, because it connects directly to one thing you once needed from them but never received when it mattered most. What you once needed from them wasn't something extravagant. It was reassurance at the exact moment uncertainty was hurting you most. There was a time when one clear sentence, one honest action, or one decision from your soulmate could have changed the entire emotional atmosphere between you. But they hesitated. Maybe they assumed you already understood. Maybe fear convinced them there would always be another opportunity. Whatever the reason, they now recognize that their silence left you carrying questions that should never have been yours alone. And this memory has become impossible for them to ignore, because the stronger you become, the more clearly they see what you deserved back then. That is why their first concrete action isn't meant to impress you. It's meant to correct a pattern. They want to give you something they failed to give before, unmistakable clarity. But the words they're considering saying contain an admission you may never have expected. Your soulmate wants you to know that they noticed the moment you changed. Not weeks later. Not after someone explained it to them. They felt it almost immediately. Something about your energy toward the situation became quieter. You stopped reaching emotionally for answers they weren't giving. You stopped trying to decode every little sign. And instead of feeling relieved that the pressure was gone, your soulmate felt your absence in a completely new way. That was when happiness and fear collided inside them. They were happy because they could see you returning to yourself, but frightened because they suddenly understood that your love was never supposed to require you to abandon your peace. This realization changed the question in their mind from, "How long will they wait?" to, "What kind of person do I need to become if I want to stand beside them?" Stay till the end, because their answer to that question is leading somewhere unexpected. They are beginning to understand.